Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University.
Welcome back to Civics in a Year. This is going to be interesting because our topic today is Alexander Hamilton and his late in life moral awakening. And we have Dr. Beienberg. And I am interested in this because, again, I've read the Hamilton biography from Professor Stephen Knott, who is one of my favorites. I have read the Chernow. I cannot tell you how many times I've listened to the Hamilton soundtrack and also seen the play. And so it makes me giggle. But apparently Alexander Hamilton, and late in life for him, we all know that he was gunned down by Aaron Burr. Dr. Beienberg, I don't know that you can shock me any more than you have during the series because I've learned so much. How is it that Alexander Hamilton has a late in life moral awakening?
And you mentioned Burr getting gunned down. Him getting gunned down is largely a result of this. That's sort of the ending. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
So there's a lot of this is based on basically a scholarly article back when historians tried to write for normal people. And if you look at the footnotes, it's just like citations to letters and text instead of like endless meta commentary on what other scholars have written. So it's by a historian, Douglas Adair, and Marvin Harvey. Adair is one of the big people in founding era in the 50s, 60s. And the article's called, Is Hamilton a Christian Statesman? So heavily what I'm talking about is based on that. But
okay.
They basically see four stages in Hamilton's life. They see sort of a young, kind of pious Hamilton, his mentor before he gets to America as a Presbyterian minister. Once he gets to America, his close chums, Elias Boudinot and William Livingston, are devout Presbyterians. His roommate, he tries to go to Princeton, which is the Presbyterian school, but he doesn't get in. So he goes to what's now Columbia, then called King's College, where his college roommates remember him very piously and aggressively defending Christianity very passionately. So that's like young Hamilton. And then middle-aged Hamilton basically becomes kind of indifference to religion, which is a little difficult because, as you may remember from those biographies, his wife is very pious, very pious, like sometimes called the saint or something like that. And so then we get to the sort of really interesting contrast and pivot turn. In the 1790s, they describe Adair and Harvey say he has, quote, an opportunistic religiosity, which is he basically insists that all good Christians have to be members of the Federalist Party. And he pitches himself as a defender of Christianity in the 1790s, basically as a cynical ploy against Jefferson and his allies. Partly because Jefferson and his crew are supporting the French Revolution, which is, by its midpoint, like openly anti-Christian, seeking to destroy Christianity in France. But the line, again, I just keep quoting them because their writing is so fun. You all should pull this article up. You can get it for free on JSTOR. It is during these years when religious slogans were so often on his lips that Hamilton seems further away from God than at any time in his whole career. So he's basically just positioning himself as this so that he can be helping him be the effective leader of the Federalists. And he is basically, right? He's a leader of the Federalists. He's able to push Adams around. As Adair and Harvey then say, who can blame Hamilton for feeling omnipotent? Who can wonder that by 1799, Hamilton confused himself with God? And so, and now the Reynolds affair isn't what breaks him. He actually still continues to have this. It's not the Reynolds affair. It's his complete, basically, because that's in like 1796, 97. It's a little earlier. So he weathers that and still apparently thinks he's can do what he wants. But it's in basically after that, 98, 99, 1800, that Hamilton starts to fail at basically everything, going from almost like de facto king of America. So Adams pushes Hamilton, because Hamilton has basically tools in Adams's cabinet, and
Mhm.
Adams pushes them out. He basically closes down the big army that that Hamilton wants to run. Washington dies, which is a blow to Hamilton. And then I assume you remember from the Chernow book, Hamilton basically tries to do a legislative coup in 1800, right?
Yes.
So he tries to convince John Jay basically to block the Jeffersonians from picking the Electoral College. And amusingly, Hamilton very cynically plays on, because Jay, like Roger Sherman, like others, is one of the founders who was undisputably like a very pious evangelical Christian. And so Hamilton says, we have to do this. We have to stop Jefferson because he's, quote, an atheist in religion and a fanatic in politics. Now, the irony is Hamilton's preferred candidate is Thomas Pinckney, who is actually an atheist, going back to how cynical Hamilton is being about religiosity here. So he's trying to basically trick Jay to block Jefferson for being an atheist and instead promote his guy who is an actual atheist. And so Hamilton's doing all kinds of crazy stuff in that election, right? So he wants Pinckney. So he wants to destroy Adams. So he writes that, manifesto basically saying that 58-page manifesto on why Adams is an incompetent idiot. So he's hoping to, move Pinckney up and Adams down. That gets leaked, obviously, and that's an embarrassment for Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's obviously trying to stop Jefferson. And then he's trying to stop Burr, right? So he's basically in this like cycle here where he's just constantly getting defeated on that, and he loses, right? He does manage to stop Burr, but otherwise, right, he's disgraced. He's basically kicked out. He's powerless in the Federalist Party. His influence has been shown to be weak. His enemy Jefferson is president, and he more or less has a breakdown, which is far more severe apparently than the Reynolds affair. And so we have these like almost endearing reflections from his children, almost saying like, they're not saying they're glad it happened or anything like that, but that like, wow, like he's a good dad now. He just hangs out in his garden and he goes and reads the Bible. And then he says how wonderful it is to be out in God's creation with the garden here. So he seemingly like has this actual like where he's just despairing and begging for God's mercy, atoning for all the bad things he's done. And then this actually is sort of and then at this point, obviously, his son dies in the duel and his oldest daughter goes insane. Mm-hmm. So that sort of helps, encourage in a weird way. Again, he's like sort of more despairing and recognizing he's calling for God's help and mercy as his life gets tougher. He tries to stay out of politics, sort of, but he's too addicted to it. And so at one point, he toys with building like a Christian Constitution Society, which on the one hand sort of has reflections of what he wanted in the 1790s, but seemingly he actually cares about the religious stuff because he's also trying to basically have the Federalists become popular again by doing charitable work, which is what he thinks will be like doing both. It's good politics and good societal stuff, good Christian service. But he even tries to basically forgive and protect Jefferson because he tries to suppress he still has allies in the newspapers. And he tries to suppress the publication of the Hennings affair to protect Jefferson's reputation. Now, I'm not saying Jefferson's a good guy on that, but Hamilton is basically behaving in a very different way than he was before, which is like, here's my political enemy. How can I do right by him? Rather than like, how can I basically libel him and grind him into the ground? And so obviously this jumps us ahead to the duel that I sort of teased at the beginning. And so we have his writing, like he writes about it ahead of time where he basically says like, if I get basically like, if I want, I can win this, I can kill Burr. But he says like, I won't do it. It's unchristian. Like I won't murder this guy. I won't kill him. So if he kills me, I'll throw my shots. And he does. And he gets shot. And as he's getting hauled back and he's in the house, and apparently his wife doesn't know he's been shot for quite a while. That's sort of, it's unclear that she knows she doesn't know like why he's ailing, according to some of these accounts. Mm-hmm. And so he's begging ministers to come give him communion because he hadn't been a member of a church. He'd just been Bible reading on his own. He wants communion. And they're initially they're hesitant because usually you have to be sort of a member of that church to get communion. They're not making it hard to be a member, but you got to at least be a member. But eventually, I think the Anglican one does eventually at the end. And so he sort of dies happy on that sense. But yeah, the striking contrast between like Hamilton is like Bible reading garden guy versus Hamilton reviling everybody else for being an evil atheist while he is himself not actually a Christian and scheming to have his atheist buddies installed is kind of wild.
It's so interesting because on our other podcast, the Arizona Civics podcast, we had Andrew Porwancher on to talk about his book, The Jewish World of Alexander Hamilton. And it's just a really interesting thing to consider how religion plays a part in who people are and what they do. So, we have the Reynolds affair. His son dies in a duel. His eldest daughter essentially reverts back to a child. The trauma is so great. Do you think that the combination of those events really kind of leads him to finding comfort in the Bible and trying to figure out why? I mean, that's losing a child is traumatic, but being involved in essentially America's first sex scandal, your kid is murdered and then one of them goes insane. Do you think that that's kind of what led him to trying to find solace essentially in the Bible?
I think that's true. Adair and Harvey say put the timeline as the sort of political fall, but they're all kind of happening at the same time. So it's hard to say oh, it's only this one thing. So clearly, obviously, he's got to be sort of despondent at some level from the Reynolds affair, and his wife's obviously quite pious, but yeah, that combination of all those things hitting him, he's trying to basically make sense of the universe and or also recognize he's kind of been a scumbag. And obviously, one of the themes of the New Testament very much is this possibility of repentance and grace. So obviously you can see why that would be very appealing to somebody who's I've been a scumbag. I was bad to my wife. I've been bad to my political friends. I've been worse to my political enemies. I've had this monstrous ego. So yeah, that combination coupled with the family stuff, it's not surprising he would try to find solace in something that's not just an election. That he would realize that maybe, that there's some logic in the render to Caesar and don't make politics your idol and your God. That maybe you might get something more out of making God instead of an electoral return.
It's, again, these founders, I think this is why I love history so much, is there is so much nuance. There's so much, that we can dig up, for a lack of a better word, but to really understand the complexity of the human beings that founded our country. I think often people, rise them up to this level of demigod, but the fact is they were men who made mistakes, who, had these later in life moral awakenings after maybe not quite such a moral life. Is there anything else you think with Alexander Hamilton and this later in life moral awakening that we need to know to really understand him as a whole person?
He's a complicated guy. And, you alluded to Porwancher's thing, right? So it was our former colleague. That's sort of a controversial take, sort of his he grew up Jewish thing, but ultimately it doesn't. But he's clearly interested from the beginning in sort of religious things. But it does, I guess, to understand Hamilton, kind of working back from the religious thing to the sort of the mid-career is this is a guy who is incredibly successful and incredibly powerful, right? He's not going to be president because of the Reynolds affair, but he still is basically the power behind the throne in so many ways. And, these things shall pass. So in some sense, maybe it's less about what Hamilton teaches or what we can think about Hamilton. And I don't think that's the worst lesson for sort of other people to just there are lessons that we can have from their memory that, as you said, these are people. And so they make good choices, they make bad choices, and that has consequences. But that also has, examples that we can follow as good or bad or parts thereof and divided within the same people.
Yes. Professor Beienberg, thank you so much for taking us on this journey with Alexander Hamilton.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.